Successful people learn how to make their mind work for them. I'm David Nagel, and this is the Successful Mind Podcast.
Hey everyone, this is BT and welcome to Inside the Episode. Today, David and I are going inside episode 170 on finding peace. So, David, This episode dropped on Christmas. Amazing. You asked the question you hear most frequently around this time of year, how do I manage a dysfunctional situation? The answer you gave was very simple and to the point. You don't. In fact, you don't have to go to these gatherings. You are choosing to go.
Right.
So the question I have is, why do you think so many people continue to put themselves in these unwanted positions, especially as it relates to the holiday season? Is it simply tradition? It's the way it's always been. Is it fear of disappointing family? Is it a combination of both or something more than that?
I think it's a little bit of all of that and a little more. Like we have this, and if people really think about this, it's a very irrational obligation that we have to family. I've worked with thousands of people and thousands of people in situations where their family, where they have a family member that's seriously toxic. They hate being around this family member, yet they go to everything. They interact with this person all the time. All the person does is rip them down in their life. And I'm like, why won't you just let this person go and move on with your life? I can't. They're my brother. I can't. It's my mother. I can't. It's my Aunt Jane. Where in our mind did that become okay? So if we really want to break it down to actually how this happens, it comes from the idea that we're raised with their safety and family, that's where you're safe. Nobody will ever care about you as much as your family. And that's not true. That is absolutely not true. Now, it's true for some. It's true for some people. Some people that have healthy families, this is not an issue. But for the people that don't, they've been brainwashed with the idea that these individuals that they call their family, so to speak, are often very often dysfunctional. Many times they're toxic. A lot of times they are jealous. They're mean. They have a tremendous amount of regret that they haven't done with their own life or what they didn't do with you when you were a kid or whatever. Like they're carrying a bag full of shit and they dump it on you all the time. And the other thing is that very often when children become adults, there's an interesting dynamic that takes place. Parents have a lot of identity wrapped up in raising kids for 20 plus years.
That's all they have, and that's their singular focus almost is those kids.
Yeah, and especially for moms, right? It's even more for moms than it is for dads. So when this child grows up, the parent is then facing the idea of, I'm alone, right? I mean, maybe you're married or whatever, but the kids are gone. Now what? What I've been doing is the main purpose of my life, keeping these kids alive, making sure they get an education, keeping them out of trouble, directing them in the right direction. It's over. It's over. And if we haven't prepared for it, it can be a huge emotional letdown because we can feel lost as far as, well, what's my purpose in life now? Now what do I do? What is the thing that gives my life meaning? The problem was that the raising of children shouldn't have been the thing that gave your life meaning to begin with. It have some meaning in your life, no question about it. It can have a large meaning in your life, but the overall meaning of your life, no, because the idea is that there's other things that we do in life besides raising children, right? You know, let's say if you're a wife and you're a mother, okay, those are two things that you do. You're a wife, you're a mother. But you do other things also, right? You have relationships with other people. You may have an amazing career doing something. You may not have an amazing career. But whatever it is that you do is of your own making. So you literally create that. When you have somebody who is deeply in need for love, very often you will have them find that they'll have children just for that purpose, so that somebody will love them unconditionally. And then as that person begins to move away, they resent it. Because that person, subconsciously, they were supposed to stay there forever and love them unconditionally. Now the person's gone, so they're not getting what they thought that they were getting before. So then what ends up happening is we see a tremendous amount of manipulation. Parents manipulating the children. You need to come by me, not by your in-laws for Christmas.
The tug of war between in-laws.
It is. I mean, it's a batshit crazy thing. Well, we're going to go to my husband's parents this year, and then your parents are hurt, and then that's flip-flop.'re going to go to the wife's parents this year, and then the husband's parents are hurt, right? So whenever we see that, what we're observing is dysfunction, right? If my kids, like all my children are grown now, and it's starting to get to the point where they're not all coming by me for Thanksgiving. They're not all coming by me for Christmas. They have other things that they want to do. They also want to go see their mom. And I'm very encouraging. Like, just, okay, I'm here. If I'm going to do Christmas, if I say I'm doing Christmas, here's the day. Let me know if you want to come. If you want to come, great. If you don't want to come, there's no hard feelings. We could get together at a totally different time. I can still get you a gift. I can send it to you, whatever. Have a fantastic holiday. I don't feel bad. I don't feel lonely.
And you don't project that onto them like, oh, poor me, all by myself.
No guilt.
Yeah, no guilt. Because you know that comes from people.
Oh, Jesus Christ. It is like my mother was the guilt monger, right. Like that's what she did. And my mom's day was Christmas Eve. So when I was like, there's this whole crazy story behind it, which I don't need to get into right now. I'll save that for another time. But my mom was raised with her Christmas, where she gets to open presents and everything, being Christmas Eve night. So the tradition would be that they would have dinner, and then after dinner, everybody would get around the tree and they would open presents. So the way that I was raised as a kid is that with my mom and my grandparents on that side, we would spend Christmas Eve, we would have dinner, we would open presents. The next morning, we would go to my father's mother's house, my grandmother, my other grandmother, and we would open presents there too, and my cousins would be there, and because they all kind of operated the same way. So when I became an adult and I started having children, the idea was that my mother expected my brother and I both to show up with our families on Christmas Eve. And it didn't always work that way, because now we had to take into consideration what were our in-laws doing on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day. When were they going to have the family gathering? And sometimes it was the same day. Some years it fell on the same day. So I'm totally going to respect my wife. I want to make sure that we get to see her family also. And sometimes I had to say, I'm not coming this year. And my mother would be just crushed, just absolutely crushed. How can you do this? Why would you do this? Isn't there another way? Why didn't you set this up earlier to be different? And it was, total manipulation. And there were times where I would be there, and then my brother wouldn't be there with his kids, and all she did was talk bad about him the whole time that we were there. It's like, you know what? This is just not
right.
This is not why we're here.
Yeah, it's not. It's not in the spirit. It's not in the spirit of the season. It never was intended to be that way. And they feel left out for some reason, or slighted or scorned, and then they shit talk behind your back when you're not there to defend yourself. And they would never say it to your face, but they would, kind of make mention to someone else, and then roundabout way it would get back to you. I remember when we made that decision to no longer, traipse across the country to split. One year we'll go to Thanksgiving here. The next year we'll go to Christmas there. We would we're starting our own tradition.
Yeah.
You may be invited to ours. You may not be, but this is for us now. And I know that there's people out there who are like, well, I'm, as a young kid, you're so into traditions. You want to just do the same thing over and over and over again. It was funny because we just had a conversation with our youngest, who is experienced Christmas changing. She's 16. It's not the same as when she was 6, right? And she's having these philosophical, changes going on in her mind. And it's just because she's getting older and she's seeing how things aren't as magical. They're still magical, but they're not, like waiting for Santa to come, which we talked about in an earlier episode about the mythical creatures. She's really struggling and grappling with this, but it's cool to see the young mind work as you transition into something new, because they're formulating what their traditions may be when they get older. And I hope, and I believe I will get to the place where you're at. Like, I love it when my kids come home. I've got one at college. She's home for the holidays. I love that. But at the same time, I do want them to have their own traditions, and they can invite us if they want. If they want to do their own thing, that's fine. I'm hoping to remove any sort of judgment as I get older about where we spend our time, because that's for you. And whatever it is, it should be in the spirit of the holiday, and it should all be, good tidings.
Yeah.
And that's not always the case. I mean, you mentioned in the episode about how we justify our family's bad behavior, and how sometimes, even without us even knowing it, find ourselves participating in the chaos that is just this negativity.
Yeah.
And then you also said we manage the problem before we even arrive to this festive gathering. We start pre-thinking like, oh, what's going to happen when so-and-so gets a little tipsy, or what's going to happen here? So you're already managing the problem before it even takes place, which tells you that there's a problem to begin with. When you talk about controlling and redirecting the conversation, because you're really good at this and you've mentioned it a lot, can you share how you personally got to that place? I assume it had to be you gaining more confidence in your own life and asserting yourself, but you got to a place where you felt comfortable saying, hey, I'm doing amazing things. Even if they shot you down and said, you're out of your mind, you got to a place where you're able to do that. Can you talk more about how you got there?
Well, honestly, in the beginning, it didn't come from a functional place. I didn't know it at the time. It was my internal desire to try to bring everybody with me. And it was part of the process of finding out that they did not want to go. So that was a painful process that I had to work through, because I realized that, for a large extent, I'm going to have to let them go, so to speak. It wasn't a complete cut you out of my life situation, but it was, with all of these experiences, I'm not going to be able to take you with me. So the idea first came up with this conversation that I had with my wife coming home from Christmas one year, and I was having like a weird deja vu experience there. And I'm sitting there at the dinner table thinking, and I didn't say this to her at the time, it wasn't until we left, and I'm thinking, I'm flashing back to the Christmas before this one and the Christmas before that. And I'm saying, we had the exact same conversation at the same time. Everybody's in the same seats. We were talking about the exact same thing. And I'm thinking, is that right? Am I remembering that right? So when we got in the car and we left, I said, I got to ask you a question. I said, I had this experience where when this was happening and this was happening, this is the exact same thing that we were talking about, and this is what this person said, and this is what this person said. I said, is that just me projecting into this, or is that really the way that it was? And she said, I was thinking the same damn thing. She's like, it is the same conversation every year. And it doesn't change. It just doesn't change.
Almost to the minute where you can plan for,
here
comes the dessert, here comes this conversation.
Well, that's what I said. I said, I feel like we could have teletransported out of last year and into this year in the exact same spot and just picked up the same conversation. I just kept going with it.
What is that? Like, what, I mean, is it just an uncomfortable, like, we don't know how to communicate with each other, so we'll tell the same stories? Because that is a level of awareness that I've recently, within the last 5 years, have come to be aware of myself. When I get around my buddies, we tell the same stories. When I get around my family at a reunion, we tell the same stories. Now, the stories get a little foggier, maybe a little grander, but they're still the same thing. And you're right, we continue to do that. But when you're aware of it, it kind of open your eyes and you just sit back and you observe it. It's so fascinating.
Well, so here's the interesting thing about that. I think in many situations that's true, but you don't see those people, your buddies, throughout the year. You may see them once every year, once every couple of years. So you talk about what you did when you guys hung out together, right?
The hijinks. Yeah.
In the family situation, it was different because I would see these people throughout the year for different things, barbecues, birthdays, grandkids, like this type of thing. What I came to the conclusion of was that There was nothing else to talk about. Nothing else changed in their life.
Nothing happened.
Nothing. So I tested this theory, right? Like I got a thesis on this whole thing. And I said, I'm going to start this conversation and say, tell me something good that happened in your life. I never got to gratitudes and appreciations with them. That just would have never worked because I don't think there was anything that they were really grateful for. So I would go around a table and I would say, tell me something great that's happened in your life this year. None of them could do it.
Wow.
They couldn't do it. And it would turn into a rant or complaining. Yeah. And inevitably somebody making sarcastic jokes or humor or whatever. And I was like, this is what it is. They don't have anything that's different, that's celebratory in their life. And that's really sad.
Yeah. And with our lives, before coming into your sphere and now after, I can tell you that you actually sat us down, Steph and I, one time and said, you realize that you do more in a calendar year than a lot of your family members did over the course of 20 years. Yeah. Like it's rapidly changing. So it's not difficult for us to find gratitude and to have different conversations because of all the different experiences we've had. And I thought that was really fascinating because you're right. It's the same conversation that goes on around the same tree with the same ornaments and the same food and the same time almost every year. Now, I don't want to come across as being like, I don't appreciate where I came from or the traditions that my family instilled in me because I did love it. But all that glitters was not gold too. And what's interesting about this is when you were talking about this, it got me thinking about, what was Christmas like for you when you were a kid and then how it changed when you were a teen, like I mentioned my daughter a moment ago, and then into your young adulthood and early, career and how you experience it today. What was it like for you then? And then when did you become awake to, wow, I thought it was one way, but now that I step back, not much has changed, but I view it completely differently. I mean, that's a broad question. I apologize, but it got me thinking about that.
For the most part, as a child, Christmas was a pretty magical experience for me. The magic went out of it for me one year when I started having trouble in school. The way that they dealt with that was they would ground me from one report card to another. So they would take away all my privileges, right? I couldn't go out and play. I would literally be grounded from most things all summer long if I didn't do well the year before. I spent a lot of time being grounded. But one Christmas, my mother did something that was just downright cruel. And all I got for Christmas was a Bible.
That was it.
And I was told to read that.
That was your lone Christmas
that was
gift.
It.
Wow.
That's all I got. And my mother was not a religious person in any way. She didn't go to church. If I wanted to go to church, I went with my grandmother, right? I don't ever remember going to church with my mother unless it was like a wedding or, something like that, or a funeral or something. But I remember being shocked. I was young. I probably was maybe 8, 9 years old. And that's what I got. Everybody else got stuff and I got a Bible.
Man.
And she was like, maybe you should think about this.
And that was it.
And then I was kind of like, I remember being really devastated. Like,
sure.
I thought I was going to get these things that I wanted. And in contrast, I always did get most of the things that I wanted for Christmas. And I realized that there's a lot of people that don't. So, but it was more, I realized that she took a holiday to bring in punishment, to do that. And then the second time where the magic really kind of went out of it was when my parents got divorced. That was a crazy several years, So we ended up spending Christmas the first year they got divorced with like my aunt and uncle who we had never spent Christmas with. My dad wasn't around. It was weird. Like the traditions were gone. The way we did things were gone. All of that was gone. So that I lost that probably at about for good, probably about 13 years old. And then later on, in my later teen years, my mother tried to bring it back and redo it that way. And then, of course, when my children and my brother's children started to be born, there was a little more magic came back in it, because now we could do that for the kids and we could create our own experience, which my wife and I did in a great way. And she was always fantastic with that stuff, creating experiences for the kids. So that was a lot of fun. But yeah, that's what happened.
Yeah, it's really interesting, because I was thinking, I've always loved the Christmas season. I was the nerd who decorated his own room. I had my own little mini tree. I hung garland from the ceiling in the back of the trailer house. I always loved it, and I always loved the music and the festivities around it. And I wouldn't say I ever lost it, but when the magic starts to come out of it for me is probably around probably my late teens, early 20s. And I just remember the law of polarity at the time. I didn't know it was the law of polarity, but we would spend Christmas Eve with my maternal grandparents, who lived, about 15 minutes away from where I grew up in a small town in Montana. We would drive up there and we would do the whole thing, and we would get to open presents from them on that night. And then the next day, we would go next door, because we shared a plot of land in the country with my paternal grandparents, and they were right next door. So I would go over there and we would do like a Christmas dinner and then presents there. So I really got 3 Christmases. I got the Christmas Eve with my grandparents. That was my mom's side of the family. Then we got our morning carnage, where we're ripping and whatever we got from Santa and all that stuff. And then the evening was spent next door at my grandparents' house. And I remember when I was, like I said, probably late teens, early 20s, and they started about noon drinking Long Island iced teas, like traditional, like Christmas drink. Hey, let's throw together some Long Island iced teas. And they were hammered beyond belief. And the amount of nitpicking and the typical asshole behavior that was taking place around that table, I had gotten to a point where I was done. You talked in the episode about, what does it mean when you create your own family? In that moment, I was done with these people. And
This is your mom and dad?
This is my dad's side of the family.
Your dad's side of the family.
Yeah, my mom's side of the family was much more loving and caring and friendly. My dad's side was not. They were constantly nitpicking. The brothers and sisters did not get along. My lovely Nana always tried to hold them together. She was the glue, but she could not overcome the powers of darkness that were around them. Yeah. But I'll tell you what, I stood up and said, look, you guys are horribly awful people. I am choosing not to participate, and I'm leaving. And I got up and I walked home. Yeah, it was right next door. The phone started ringing off the hook. Please come back. Please come back. I'm like, my Nana got on the phone and said, please come back. I'm like, no, I'm not. I don't want my presence. I don't want any part of it. I'm not going to do this anymore. And the reason I tell that story is because it shows you that we choose to do these things. I was 20 at the time, so I was still, entering into my young adulthood. But I was choosing to be there, and in that moment, I was choosing not to be. And after that, it was never the same. Like, I tried to go back there the next year, and I was getting to a level of awareness that I'm actually surprised now that I think about it. I didn't think I'd ever get there. But now looking back on it, I was pretty elevated from where I was compared to who these people were and how they were behaving. It was just a difficult time. And like I said, I stood up for myself in that moment, and it felt really good at the time, but it came with a heavy heart, because Christmas and whatever holiday, it's about love and gratitude and cheeriness and happiness. And when you're drinking Long Island iced teas at 11 o'clock in the morning on Christmas Day, that's a recipe for freaking disaster. Yeah. So I'm thinking to myself, like, that is just not how I want to live my life. And my kids have never really been a part of that. Like our Christmas Eves and our Christmas days. And I told Steph, it's like, we're like Ellis Island. Anybody who doesn't have anybody who they want to come to our house and spend some time, come on over for Christmas Eve. We'll have a drink and a toast and celebrate by the fire, whatever it might be. It's just remembering the importance of the gratitude. And I love how you brought that in this episode. And when you talk about dysfunction, just so I don't miss this, in my notes, I wrote down a couple of callbacks for some episodes you did on dysfunction that I think are really good to go back and listen to as a complement to this particular episode. Go back to episode 18, where you talked about addicted to dysfunction, and go back to episode 32, which is one of my favorites you've ever done, called You Can't Make Sense of Crazy. Because that's what this is. This time of year, there's a lot of craziness that goes into this time of year. I heard a very interesting statistic about how people go into so much crazy debt around this time of the year. That's why people are so vibrating at such an angry, resentful level. They go into debt that requires them like 8 or 9 months to get out of. But by that time, the cycle starts again. Yeah. So you never fully get out of it. It's just fascinating. But all that to say, I love the holiday. I know that we celebrated here. I know that you celebrated too, David, and we've shared some great experiences around the holiday. And, we don't talk, our lives are probably more common with the most people listening to this.
Right.
And I'm sure there's people that are like, I don't know what they're talking about. My life was great. Totally. That's fantastic.
Yeah,
I'm sure your life is amazing. And my life, looking back on it, was great too. But now that I'm older, I can see how some of that manipulation, even on, like my mom's side of the family, that everything it felt like a perfect Hallmark movie. There's all that glitters is not gold. That's all I'm going to say. It's not always 100% like that. But
I will say this: it's ever since I took control of my own life and who I was going to hang around with, all that craziness stopped.
Right.
Because I didn't have people that were celebrating. Like, I've been to your house many times during Christmas over the years, and nobody sits around and talks about how bad things were over the year. It's a great time.
It's so fascinating when you say that, because you're absolutely right. I haven't been around, like, when we get together with our team for Thanksgiving, or we get together for Christmas, or we get together with whatever holiday it is. The one thing that's not there was a constant growing up is the negativity.
Right.
There's always a negativity. There's a negative thread that runs through it. It's, my body's breaking down. Oh, I lost my job. Oh, I'm this. But here it's like we're talking about ways to elevate ourselves, and you'd think that it'd be more aware of it until you just said that. I'm like, God, that's the one thing that was a constant that I no longer have.
Yeah.
My new normal is to be with people you're choosing to be with.
Right.
And I think that in itself is an amazing thing. Yeah. So, now that we're a few days removed from Christmas, we're on the precipice of a new year, a new decade, in fact. How can a person take the information that they learned from this episode around finding peace and apply it to their everyday life? Knowing you're going to come into contact with negative people like we just talked about, how can you take the nuggets you dropped in here and use it for everyday life moving forward in the new year, new decade?
Again, it's about responsibility. I think that the reason that we end up in situations with people that are they're dysfunctional, or they're not behaving themselves or whatever, you can maintain your peace in that situation if you stop judging the situation, right? Meaning that whatever meaning you give to anything determines the way that your inner state expresses itself, the way that you feel. So if I come in here, we do this podcast, and I'm like, fuck, this fucking blows. I don't want, like, then I've lost my peace, right? I lost my peace. If we're around somebody that is complaining and miserable and whatever, if we come from a place of empathy and compassion, with also the understanding that we probably won't be around the person again, we won't lose our peace. We'll stay in peace. We'll understand, people are having a hard time. There's people out there having a hard time. That's true. And maybe the time that they're having is so hard that they can't find joy to share with anybody else. I will try to bring some joy into their life. If it's accepted, great. If it's rejected, that's entirely up to them. But you're not going to steal my peace, because I'm going to control the meaning that I give to it. If we're always going into situations looking at what we can get from them, we will always be disappointed. If we go into situations looking for what we can give, we will always get what we need.
I love that. I love the when you can shift from a getting energy to a giving energy, it's a game changer. Absolutely.
100%.
And you let this episode ended with you basically just talking about what you just said. Never let someone else steal your peace. I can't think of anything more beautiful in the moment than that. You are in charge. You control it. Never let someone else steal your peace.
Absolutely.
Well, I am 100% grateful for you and what you have done. This is, we're getting towards the end of this year, and I cannot wait to see what 2020 brings for us.
Yep. Happy holidays to everybody. Whatever you celebrate it in peace and have a magnificent new year.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming inside, David.
Thanks for listening to the Successful Mind podcast. And if you like what you heard and you want to know more, go to davidnagel.com/free stuff.